everybody, and welcome. I hope that you're doing well. It has been a little while, but end of the semester has been crazy. Things have been going on. My world has been, I don't know, chaotic is a nice way of saying it, but I've had some time off from work. I have recovered from illness, and it's time for history. So I hope that you're all doing well. Cave Geek is here. McHev, welcome in. I recall seeing you in another stream that I was hanging out in. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but welcome, first time chatter. Silver, there we go. Yeah, that's right. You are Silver's friend that he met, and you've got a couple of kids, and yeah. Okay, so cool. It takes me a little while to make the connections. I remember the conversation, but names, you know how that goes. Kyle, welcome in. Festivus draweth nigh. Indeed. History of Festivus is actually a pretty short stream. It's just like Frank Costanza turned into a jerk, and, there we go. Matt, welcome in. Is that a duck in a holiday sweater? It is a duck in a holiday sweater. Okay, there we go. What's up, Robin? Good to see you. Welcome in. How are things? Hope you're all doing well. This is actually a stream that I've been sort of toying with doing since I first started streaming. The idea of doing like an entire series of streams that are just like, where did the holidays come from? Not all of them would be really super interesting. You could do some big ones. We could probably have a stream on Easter or Halloween. But, like the history of Arbor Day. Probably not going to be a super interesting stream. People liked trees. I don't know. That seems like one of those things that maybe you could turn into some sort of podcast where people deep dove into it and found people that were involved and did interviews. I don't know. That's just not necessarily my thing. But welcome in, everybody, and we're going to be talking about Christmas tonight because it's time, right? A week from yesterday, and it's not like people aren't crazy about everything right now. I had to drive into town yesterday to get some groceries, and it ended up becoming an entire issue. Crazy people everywhere. So, anyway. It's that time of the year, though. So, as always, we're going to just kind of do our thing, and we'll talk, and I'll share some pictures here, and we will chat along. If you have questions about anything, you're always welcome to ask and hang out. But that is sort of the goal of the stream, to talk Christmas. So, we have this whole thing called Christmas, and it's turned into an entire, I don't know, like cultural event. It's almost an institution at this point. We've got music, we've got traditions, we've got all kinds of things that go back what we might think are hundreds of years, but what actually are we celebrating, And of course, there are lots of different answers to this. There are the religious answers, and then there are the answers that people that are anti-religious want to give, and the reality is probably somewhere in between, as it is in most situations. So what we're going to try to do tonight is explain what Christmas is, where it came from, and how it got to be the way that it is today. Yeah, exactly. We have entire arguments about whether or not Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Is a movie that takes place at Christmas a Christmas movie because it takes place at Christmas? Or does there have to be sort of Christmas kind of theme going on here, right? What's up, Tad? Good to see you. Right, we celebrate the Xmas. I'm a big fan of using Xmas. I refer to it almost always as Xmas when I type or write anything, on the off chance that somebody will comment, and then I get to actually hit them with the reality of the history of that story, because it's kind of like bait. But you know how that goes. That's kind of the way that I do things. But where do we start? Well, we have to go pretty far back in time. And we have to go back to our ancient wandering around pastoralist, semi-nomadic, or early agriculturalist civilized history way back. Way back in history. So we're talking prior to even what we might consider to be organized religion. We knew about the lengthening and the shortening of the day because of the way that the axial tilt of the Earth reacts to the revolution of the Earth around the sun. We get shorter days and longer days. And during different times of the year, we're going to have short days and long days. And these are based around 2 days that are the winter and the summer solstice. The winter solstice, of course, is the shortest day of the year. This is when we have the fewest numbers of hours of daylight in a 24-hour cycle. So that is the whole basis. And we've known this historically for a really long time. We very frequently underestimate the amount of astronomy that was known by what we might call uncivilized people. These are people that might not live in cities or might not live sedentary lives, but we know for a fact historically that these people understood a lot more about the motion of the planets and the stars and the sun and the moon than the average person does today. And we kind of think like, oh, we know everything that there is to know, but we don't really understand this as a physical part of our lives in the same way that those ancient people did. So we've got to go back that far to get where we start off, because we know that after a particular moment, usually on our calendar around December the 21st, the years go from, or the days rather, go from being shorter to being longer again. And this is a moment of surprise and a moment of excitement, because at this point we move back towards warmness, right? Or we move back towards longer days, and this is the return of the sun, so we're very happy about that. A study has been done and proved that Die Hard is more of a Christmas movie than Rudolph is. Interesting. Did Tolkien invent Christmas before or after The Hobbit? That's a fair question. Tolkien invented his version of Christmas prior to writing The Hobbit, because he actually wrote letters to his children from Father Christmas. And these are collected in a book that you can buy. They're just called letters from Father Christmas. But what's interesting about that particular question is that Tolkien involved a lot of things that are going to influence the way that he set up stuff in Middle-earth and vice versa. For example, the letters from Father Christmas get ever more involved, and there are different numbers of like added characters. There's a polar bear that is a good guy that sort of fights on the side of Santa against the evil goblins. And this is a pretty interesting comparison to Beorn, the shapeshifter from The Hobbit, who fights against goblins of the Misty Mountains. So there's a lot of overlap between things like the letters from Father Christmas and The Hobbit, and then stuff that's also in the Silmarillion and Lord of the Rings. So they're really interesting stories to read, and you can check those out. If you just want to see the books, I have that book on the list there. You don't have to worry about what the purpose of that list is, but if you want a link to the actual book, Letters from Father Christmas, you can find it on that list. Catching up with chat. Is there a religious difference on Xmas between the streams of Christianity? Yeah, Robin, we're going to talk about that, and we'll specifically talk about that rather extensively, like in the back half of the stream. Provided entertainment at the time. Exactly. The sky's pretty friggin' interesting. Indeed. What's up, Chris? Good to see you. Yeah, exactly. A lot of his stuff was absolutely for his kids. So, good questions all. But we've known about this lengthening of the day and lengthening and shortening of the day for a long time. And it does not take us long after we settle down in cities to begin celebrating this moment. So if we go all the way back in early recorded history, we have all sorts of traditional religious, or what a lot of people want to call pagan practices that are based around this idea that the sun dies and then is reborn and gets, the day gets longer again after the solstice. We have big celebrations of this because we know that it's getting closer to things being warm again and getting closer to planting season. There's also a tendency during this time period, especially for pastoralists. These are people that, of course, like herd animals for a living, to cull a lot of their herds at this period of time, especially older animals that are past their birthing years. This is when you kill a lot of your animals right around this time of the year, because usually speaking in the northern hemisphere, the worst of the winter stuff is in January and February. And if you have a smaller flock to take care of during those months, it's easier to do because there's less fodder for those animals to eat. So in cities, pastoralists would very frequently spend the winter nearby cities. You're going to get a sort of glut of affordable meat on the market, because meat is not something that is very frequent in most ancient diets, especially in early civilized diets, where most of our meals are going to be based around bread or maybe some fruits or some other vegetables. Meat is a once or twice a week kind of thing. But if all of the herdsmen are going to come down out of the hills onto the plains, and they're going to let their animals kind of forage around, and they're going to kill a lot of them, bring that into the city to trade, there's going to be a lot of meat, which is good time for feasting, right? By the time we get to more organized groups and we get something that might look a little bit more close to us, of course, we get the Roman practice of Saturnalia, which maybe not sure, but I think a lot of people would be familiar with. If we look at a photo here, this is a painting of the god Saturn. He was a Roman deity of harvest, and we see here that he is holding his sickle, which of course is a harvesting instrument. This guy is the patron god of the Saturnalia festival, which is all about celebrating harvests. And this is not directly tied to the winter solstice. It usually ends right about the winter solstice or just before the winter solstice. And this is a period of time that varies a little bit historically speaking. If we look at Roman history, it starts off being a little bit smaller and then grows over time as its popularity becomes much more widely spread. And it ends up being about a week long. It's kind of the average. Now, some people want to say that it was a month long. That's not really the case. The harvest period was about that long, but not the entire celebration of Saturnalia. But you get about this week of bounty. You've harvested. There's a lot of food around, and we're just going to celebrate Saturn and thank him for the good harvest. And this involves a lot of drinking and feasting. But we're also going to start seeing early elements of things that are going to be more common in our version of Christmas. Now, of course, we are a long way away from Christmas, but we're adding things that are going to be kind of bubbling in the stew, if you will. And there's a lot of inversion of social order here. People that are poor would very frequently get a lot of gifts. People that were enslaved would be freed for the period of Saturnalia, and the people that were their enslavers would usually give them a little bit of money, or maybe would serve them food at a feast. So this is kind of the giving of the rich to the poor kind of thing here. And everybody could probably expect to get a little bit of a gift. Usually you're going to get something kind of small. And these were usually not really expensive things. These were not necessarily long-lasting toys. Some of them could be, something fairly practical. But they're not really going to be what we would today call like the Christmas rush, right? That's not really what's happening here in Saturnalia. Now, this period of time, of course, is going to go through some changes. We're going to get, as the Roman Empire expands, we're going to see more religious ideology mixed into the Roman ideology, and this is going to bring us to adding in this guy. Now, this is a statue here of the god Mithras. And Mithras was originally a deity that can kind of get traced all the way back to early, what we might call early Hindu beliefs, or proto-Hindu beliefs. That's probably the better way of saying it. But Mithras really catches on in Zoroastrianism, and as Rome expands, especially over into the eastern part of the Mediterranean, they're going to encounter Mithras more and more, and Mithras becomes an interesting addition to the pantheon of Rome. The Romans were very syncretic. What this means is that when they encountered new religious ideas, if they could not find an immediate parallel to something that they already worshipped, they'd kind of just fold it in. They were very hip with adopting new gods. And this was kind of something that was considered vogue, especially for the upper classes or the people that were more well-traveled, because they would go to these temples that were really far away, and they'd bring back these stories of, oh, check it out, I went to the Mithraeum over in Armenia. How cool is that? And people would be like, oh man, that must have been a great trip, and they would brag about it, but Mithras especially caught on as a mystery cult, and this was something that was very, very popular during the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, but increasingly popular in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. This was just something that the rich Romans really, really, really got involved in. They would have their sort of public religion where they would go and practice, Saturnalia, and they'd be down with all the big events that honored Jupiter and, Juno and all the big Roman gods and goddesses. But then they'd have their secret private club meetings. And there was usually some form of initiation, and there was some sort of like hidden knowledge that you're supposed to have. But Mithras was one of these. But Mithras is interesting here because he's going to catch on really, really quickly and become very important to the overall Roman sort of milieu of religion. But he's got a lot of stuff here that's going to be interesting for us when we think about Christmas. So first off, he's a sun god, and this is obviously going to put him in the direct line of the winter and summer solstices. This is going to be a big deal because as a god of the sun doing things is going to be directly related to Mithras doing things, right? So if the sun suddenly starts getting bigger again, this is indicative of Mithras coming into the world again. And his birthday was usually celebrated around the time of the solstice. And this, by the end of the 3rd century AD, so then this is in, I think, 274, the official birth date of Mithras becomes December the 25th in the Roman calendar. And that's important, obviously, because today we are going to celebrate Christmas on December the 25th in most areas. But this is going to be something that is going to put that date as the 25th as part of the important mix in the stew. And again, this is a big deal. It's, again, something that's related to the concept of the rich. They're going to have festivals. They're going to celebrate these things. It's something that people are supposed to do around this time if you're involved in the celebration. This is a big deal because we're setting dates on things, and human beings historically love to put dates on stuff. And this is actually going to be something that we'll talk about here in just a second. Again, we like having these recurring events, right? We like putting something down and saying, okay, so this is where it will be, and then this is how it will be forever, and I was the one that started this tradition. and maybe your family has Christmas traditions, and you can go back to when they first started, and you can say, well, on this time we're going to do this thing. We like doing that because we are pattern recognizing creatures. We like to experience these things. We like to look forward to these things. And if we are going to put an importance on a particular day, that starts creating social pressure to acknowledge that day. Even if you're not part of the Mithraic cult, you know that all those Mithras people are going to go out and party on the 25th because that's when their god is born, right? We're starting to see how this might line up, right? We're starting to kind of get some of the ideology. Now, outside of the Roman world, and this is going to be particularly important because this is going to have a lot of sway over it, we have what we can call the old Germanic traditions. And this is going to include people that are going to be Germanic from Germany, but also Germanic in places like Scandinavia. And they're going to celebrate this period of time, or this holiday called Yule. And Yule was originally a similar typed thing around this time period, and the way that you would celebrate this in Germanic culture is you would go find a big tree, and you were supposed to bring like the young guys, like the younger, sometimes pubescent or prepubescent guys out into the forest with you, and you were kind of given them the task to chop down the mightiest tree in the forest. I know that seems like it might be kind of a reference to, the Knights of Ni from Monty Python, but this idea of the mightiest tree in the forest is actually a pretty common theme in Germanic literature and mythology. But you would chop down this giant tree, and then everybody would haul it back to the city or the town, and you would start a big fire on the 21st, and you would put the Yule log on the fire. And as long as that log burned, Yule lasted. So if it took a week for that log to burn all the way through, Yule lasted for a week. So this is kind of incentive for you to get the biggest and mightiest tree that you could find, because the party lasted for that period of time. And this was very, very raucous. There would be games and fighting and competition. There would be rabble-rousing and drunken debauchery and feasting and quaffing and all of that fun stuff, right? This was a good time to be had. But this is, again, going to start on that winter solstice. So you start the big fire on the solstice, and then for however long the log burned, Yule lasted. And yeah, you gotta have lots of alcohol. Of course, in Scandinavian tradition, that would be mead, but Northern Germanic tradition, that's going to be your good old-fashioned beer, right? So Yule is going to play into this quite a bit because of stuff like focusing on the woods. And here you're going to find things like focus on particular types of trees, like evergreens. Because while most trees die during the year, evergreens do not. They stay green year-round. So you can look to evergreens, and you would sometimes bring limbs of evergreens into your house to symbolize keeping your house alive during the winter. Stuff like ivy that grows year-round and vines that grow year-round are part of this tradition as well. So you are getting a little bit of a hint at what's getting thrown into the mix again, right? We're starting to see, we're going to go bring a tree into our house. What's up, David? Good to see you. Etymologically, Yule comes from you all being a celebration of community. Hey, I like it. They didn't speak English at that time, but they spoke a language that influenced English. So maybe this is like some sort of convergent linguistic evolution where we had a word and then we lost it and then we brought it back. It's good to see you, David. But anyway, so Yule is part of a lot of this. Now, Christmas is weird here. Artificial snow in the middle of the summer. Not so much these days, but we're embracing the summerness of the celebration, right? So that's uh, southern hemisphere celebration kind of stuff. Most of the traditions that we have in the Western world are obviously going to be northern hemisphere traditions. And as soon as the countries from the north begin to colonize countries that are or regions that are in the southern hemisphere, you kind of have to adopt different practices and cultural tradition things that are involved, right? This is the great question in Home Alone 2. What are you going to do for a Christmas tree spending Christmas in Miami? Are you going to decorate a palm tree, right? Uh, which is a great question for Kevin McAllister to ask. So, I have watched none of the Farm series docs from the UK, but I know that you are quite fond of them. There are a few great Christmas episodes that show tradition from those periods. Interesting. That place where they don't celebrate it proper, like. um, I don't know if there's necessarily a right way or a wrong way to have a local custom, Chris. I think that people will obviously prefer their own way most of the time, but this is just likely because we're ethnocentric and we think that the way that we do it is the right way to do it. And most people probably don't actually know that there are so many different variations of this stuff that's out there because they typically don't pay too much attention to how other people are doing things. The right way is my way, and the wrong way is their way. Junk collector. That's the way that a lot of people, tend to think when it comes to any type of tradition or cultural idea or practice or things like that. It's just sort of more comfortable because this is the way that I'm normally used to thinking about it. But that's how cultural stuff works, and that's how ethnocentrism works. So, now. Where does the Christ thing fit in, right? We've got all these different holidays and concepts and traditions. Where does the Jesus thing kick in? Well, I could tell you a little bit about this, and it's going to probably be what a lot of you already know, but I can tell you from my years of teaching high school at a private Christian high school that a lot of people don't know that Jesus was not born on December 25th. Gasp. I know, it's crazy. Also, I can tell you that the earliest Christians really didn't care very much about Jesus' birth date in the first place because they didn't record it. They recorded when he died. We can do the exact... We can know, like, the day of the year that he died, but we can't... We don't know the day of the year that he was born because it wasn't that big of a deal. The fact that he was born in the circumstances around the things that he was born is the important stuff, but like not on December 25th. And we know this from any logical reading of the birth accounts that are in the Gospels of the Scripture, because if you know anything about living in that time period, you would know, first off, you didn't travel during the winter at that time period. Caesar would not have commanded you to return to the city of your birth during the winter. That command would have, the call that went out to all nations that everybody should return to the city of their birth to be counted, that's almost certainly going to happen on the first ship out of Rome in the spring. Yeah, and then it's going to take a little while to circulate around. Also, shepherds are out watching their flocks by night. Ain't no shepherd going to be out in the Palestinian wilderness hanging out with some flocks in the middle of winter because it gets cold, right? This would have been, probably late summer, early fall. Certainly not in December. Also, I know this is frustrating. If you have a nativity scene that's got wise men in it, there weren't no wise men there. The wise men showed up later. And this is evident, again, if you actually read the accounts that are in the Scriptures. They found Jesus later when he was at a house. This was not the day of. He didn't, get born and the three weird dudes show up and be like, hey, we've got stuff for you. Also, it never says that there were 3 wise men. It just says that they were magi, which is the same word that we get magician from, because they were astrologers from Persia. The word magi at the time, historically speaking, were the leaders of the Zoroastrian cults. And they were the ones that watched the stars for things and would have traveled all the way from Persia to the Levantine region, which wasn't going to happen in a day. This isn't going to happen in a week. It's also not going to be just 3 dudes on a camel hanging out with some stuff. It's going to be an entourage, because these were rich people that would have been, traveling in style. I know this is kind of destroying Christmas as you might understand it, but, this is the truth of it. We don't know when Jesus was born on the specific day. I can tell you, though, it wasn't December 25th. It's just not logical or rational if you read the actual stories. So there we go. Sometimes I can feel the blank stare. So how do you make snowmen? You don't make snowmen. You make you guys have a lot of wool down there. You could make a snowman shaped object out of sheep's wool, Chris, like a big fluffy woolly snowman. I mean, that would work, right? There are more sheep in New Zealand than there are humans. Try to tell people this, and in their heads you can see them building the pyre. Yeah, I mean, I'm a heretic, and they show up later. That's an epiphany. It probably wasn't at Epiphany either, David, but we'll get there in just a second. We're working towards that. This is the abridged version, right? Don't tell me there were child playing drums too. Yeah, probably not. Probably not. I did see a very funny meme today that said, after you traveled halfway across the country and gave birth to the Savior in a barn, the last thing that you want is some kid showing up to play a drum solo for you. Wizards are just old people with glitter in their pockets. Lumpy, what's up? Good to see you. I'm a big fan of Discworld stuff. Yeah, we make it out of sand. There you go. Right? It's too hot to be running around chasing sheep for wool. That's fair too. That's fair. But I'm just saying, if you wanted to have some level of equitable visual syncretism there, you could have had sheep's wool, just like big wads of it. All right. Okay, so Jesus is born. His birth date wasn't particularly important in the scriptural period of time, and it wasn't even really that important during the early church, because we don't have a lot of references to any sort of celebration of his birth happening at particular times of the year. We hear some people saying stuff like, oh, we just got together and we were very excited that there was this guy named Jesus and he did these cool religious things, but we don't see it recurring. We don't see it happening on any particular time. So when did the Christians decide that we need to do stuff on December the 25th? When did that cross roads? Well, we don't know. And there are people that will argue this, and they're wrong. Some people will say, oh, we know for a fact that Pope Julius I said that Jesus was going to be celebrated on December the 25th, and that was his birthday. We don't know that because we don't have any record of that. We have some really crappy, not good, old, not chronological sources that say that, but we can't trust them. So anybody that tells you that it was Pope Julius I and he was the one that, no, can't say that for sure. You absolutely recommend this interview with the Nativity Innkeeper. Interesting. You read some of the Wikipedia entry on the non-canon Gospels, and oh boy, many paint St. Peter as a whiny... Yeah, so the... what are usually referred to as the Gnostic Gospels are quite interesting. Lumpy, if you want to read the actual texts themselves, you can look up a collection of books called the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha. I know that last word is a crazy, crazy word, but if you Google Christian Apocrypha and Christian Pseudepigrapha, you can read a lot of those specific individual accounts, and some of them do get rather wild. Um, I think I've mentioned this on stream before, but my favorites are the infancy Gospels of Christ, which were probably written sometime in the 300s, maybe 200s, late 200s. Anyway, uh, but what you see is stuff like people trying to say that Jesus was doing miracles as this little kid, right? And one of them is some person that's his friend doubts that he's God, so he pushes the friend off of the roof, and the kid falls off the roof and dies. And then Jesus goes down and like resurrects the kid and was like, "I told you I was God." um, so that's pretty funny stuff. Um, you're not interested that much, but you can't shake the fact that most showed Magdalene as a leading figure that made the apostles jealous. For sure, for sure. Have I seen the ADBC that the Matt Berry rock opera? I have not seen ADBC, but Matthew Berry is hilarious, and that does seem like something I would potentially appreciate. Rock operas are hit or miss for me, but that seems like something I might appreciate. I need to watch the last season of What We Do in the Shadows, which just ended. I think either this week or last week. Yeah, it's all parody. Sure. Oh, like they wrote parody. Is it like all parody of AC/DC songs? Because that does make it more interesting. Anyway, so where do we find reference? The oldest reference that we have that Christianity or Christians decided to celebrate Jesus' birthday on the 25th comes from this really obscure document that says that they started celebrating this in 336. There's not really a lot of explanation given as to why, but the document itself comes from like the 350s. So we're not even 100% certain if the person who wrote the document in the 350s actually knew the specific year in the 330s that they said. So we know that by at least 354, the date of the 25th had been circulated, and what lends credence to that time period is that we also start seeing other big notable Christian writers start to include references to the December 25th date as a point of Jesus's birth. Now, this is important because these big writers at the time were much more influential than a lot of people today understand. A lot of the people that we refer to, these are people like John Chrysostom or St. Ambrose or St. Augustine. These people were the rock stars of the faith. And if they published a letter that got circulated around, people would take this for like face value, right? They don't really get questioned a lot. Now, they might argue amongst themselves, but the average person that was a Christian at the time couldn't read and didn't really have much of a hope of understanding any type of scripture, because at that point in the early part of the 300s, there wasn't even a canonized Bible in the first place. We don't have any sort of, fundamental like book that we would call the Bible. So these people referencing this date is really, really, really important, because that is going to validate the claim that was being circulated, right? Such writers are all the education they could get on the matter. Yeah, that's pretty much it, right, Robin? Because up until you get to Constantine in the 312s, Christianity had been illegal and had gone through periods of particularly advanced persecution. So you couldn't even necessarily talk about this stuff openly and in public, right? So if you went to a meeting and your little church leader or your priest said, "We got this letter from, I don't know, St. Athanasius," and he said that Christmas is going to be celebrated on December 25th, that was when Christmas was going to be, right? Like he had that sway. And that's really important for us to understand. So the fact that we don't see dates early on, we don't see any people referencing December 25th in 1st century or 2nd century or 3rd century. We only see this in the 4th century. That itself tells you that this wasn't something that was really widely discussed. Now, why after the 4th century? Well, after Constantine takes over in 312, 313, Christianity becomes legal. And especially after the 320s, when we start having ecumenical church councils, people can circulate letters and people can talk about stuff more broadly and openly because it's now accepted by the emperor. So we start seeing things like, hey, if we're going to have a celebration of Jesus's birth, we probably need to nail this stuff down, right? We probably need to figure out a day. And by the time, especially we get to the late 300s, and especially by like the 370s, there's going to be a big push to not just support canonized dates of Christian activity, but also to stamp out existing pagan stuff. By the time you get to the late 300s, we're going to start seeing emperors that want to ban paganism and make Christianity the official religion of Rome. And especially by the time we get to the early 400s, you're going to start seeing everybody pretty much getting rid of funding for temples that would practice the traditional Roman religion. You're going to start seeing persecution of people practicing non-Christian religions. Yeah, I don't really like the term pagan either, but I use it because everybody gets what I'm saying when I mean it. I try to say stuff like traditional or historical cultural religions, right? How did people see their ancestors as pagan? So the word pagan comes from the Latin paganus, which really just means rural or farmer, person that's outside of the city, because cities would convert faster than people out in the rural areas. And this is even true today. If you look at America, the more rural areas are much more religious than the cities. This is why, the coastal elites are coming for Jesus, because it's those people in those big cities that are trying to stamp out all of our religious freedom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the reason this becomes a slang term is, especially by the time you get to the 6, 7, 800s, there is concerted effort by centralized figures within the the Christian church to force conversion and demand that any sort of local folklore or local traditional Christian, local traditional non-Christian words. This is what happens when I can't say paganism, right? You just got to get rid of all the pagan influence. And people didn't want to, and it took a lot. We still see, this is worth pointing out too, by the time we get to like the 1200s and 1300s, we're still seeing the popes call actual crusades against pagan people in northeastern Europe. Places like, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland today, right? So these practices don't go away just because the Christianity as a religion affects the leadership, right? From persecuted to persecuting in no time flat. Less than 100 years, Junk Collector. Less than 100 years, right? So we know that sometime by the mid 300s that we get this December 25th date being important. Now, what's the justification behind this? Now, there's obviously the benefit here of replacing a non-Christian tradition with a Christian tradition, right? If we can tell people, oh, look, we're not going to go celebrate Mithras being born. We're going to go represent the true God being born, right? And he's the Son. He's the Son of God, which is a modern joke that people use a lot. I hate it. I just used it there as a bit of a joke. Anyway, the whole sun, son thing doesn't matter in the ancient world because they're completely different in like Latin, right? It doesn't rhyme. It's different in Greek as well. different in Aramaic, different in Hebrew, right? So if you've ever heard somebody say, well, Jesus is the sun, this is the sun worship, you can just tell them that doesn't work because Latin isn't English. And you can then kind of, liturgically smack them about the figurative head and shoulders. They don't believe in a God of peace. This means war. Well, there we go. There were already Christian traditions around this period of time, though, specifically dealing with this guy. This is a guy that had some stuff going on. This is Saint Martin of Tours. Saint Martin was a warrior saint, and he typically had a fairly long feasting period. He had 40 days of feasting, which lasted from mid-November until late December, and his feasting days would end on the 25th. So we've already got a little bit of a Christian tradition of having some feasting going on. If there's going to be pagan feasting, could we just replace this with Christian feasting? Maybe so. We also know that this guy enters the picture, and this is going to be a big one. This is going to be a big one. This is the big guy. This is Saint Nicholas of Smyrna. Not Smyrna, Myra. Good gracious, my words tonight. I'm not breathing enough oxygen, I don't think. I'm just not processing things. Saint Nicholas of Myra. This is jolly old Saint Nick. Now, obviously, the guy here doesn't look very much like the Nick that we know of when we think Saint Nick. Smyrna is an actual city. There is another Saint Nicholas of Smyrna. But this is not the one that we're talking about. Anyway, so the kicker here is that this guy had a feast date that was right around this day. And because he was a saint of gift giving. So in the story, Saint Nicholas had quite a bit of money, and he sold everything that he had and gave all of his money away. So he's kind of the again, we get this rich giving to the poor kind of thing, and we get the gift giving thing. And on St. Nicholas' feast day, you would kind of, talk and eat and then have a little bit in exchange a gift a little bit maybe. Again, not something big, but kind of a little gift. And his feast date was around this time in December. So if we can just say, look, we're just going to overlay Christianity, right? It's going to be an easy sell here for a lot of people. Okay, so it's this time of the year. It's the 5th is the tricky one, because depending on the calendar that you're looking at, it can also be the 19th. And this is where we're going to have to, and I was like, it's good that you bring this up, because I'm prepared for this, but I was not necessarily going to go super far into the arguments about calendars, but it's worth noting here. The calendars in the ancient world are not unified. Today, if you go to Italy, or if you go to Turkey, or if you go to Egypt, everybody's going to say that we know that it's the year 2024, right? Because we're all using a very accurate solar calendar right now. In the ancient world, they did not. They used a mix. Some calendars, like the official Roman calendar, was a solar calendar. But in the Eastern world, they still really liked using lunar calendars, which don't line up exactly with solar calendars. And very frequently, you have to base these days on other astrological events that are not specifically tied to solar concepts. So like, it will be this day after this moon, right? This is why, we have stuff like Easter every year will move a little bit, because we have to set other dates on the calendar around when the moon's going to line up with this thing, right? So in the Eastern world, the lunar calendar is much more interesting, and St. Nicholas's Day is celebrated on a different day. Now, in the modern world, I've even seen people say like in the ancient world it's the 6th, but if it's the 5th today, I'm not like the world's best when it comes to memorizing every single saint's day. So Robin, if you say it's the 5th, I'll believe you. I thought it was the 6th, but that's inconsequential overall. It's around the same time. So if you are a good old fashioned old Roman, right? Oh, that's fair too, because now we're arguing about, do we practice Spanish tradition or German tradition? And yeah, fun times, right? We'll actually talk about the Dutch in a little bit. Um, so, anyway, if I'm a good old fashioned Roman and I say, I want to celebrate Saturnalia, and they go, okay, well, we can't do that anymore because we're celebrating Jesus, not Saturn. And somebody's like, look, dang it, I want a period of feasting. I want to celebrate some birth of something, and I want a present. And they're like, okay, cool. We've got everything. We've got everything that you need here. You want to do some feasting? Look, we've got St. Martin's feast days. We'll just kind of roll that in. You want to celebrate the birth of something? How about the one true God? We'll just put that on December 25th. Let's not do Mithras, right? Also, you want a little bit of a gift? Here's St. Nicholas's feast day. Boom, there we go, right? So we've got all of the elements. Now, that's convenient. We cannot overlook the convenience of the situation, right? We cannot overlook the convenience of the situation. But then we have to have what we might call a theological justification for that, right? We've got to be able to give some sort of logic, right? We can't just say, oh, it's this way and then roll with it. We have to say why it's this way. Well, here's where some creative stuff starts happening. They say, look, okay, Jesus lived a perfect life, right? And people are like, yeah, okay, cool, I'm down with that. Well, what if he died on the same day that he was conceived? And you're like, okay, I don't know why that makes me interested, but it's got this nice, closing the loop thing, like he lived an exact number of years down to the day. Okay, I'm behind that. Like, okay, well, when was he conceived? Oh, well, we already have a date for that because we know that he and St. John were conceived around the same time, because we already have all of this stuff established because we thought St. John was really cool and we know the date that he was March 25th. Okay, so what just happens to be 9 months after March 25th? December 25th. And because we know that, Jesus was perfect, it just so happens that he has a perfect gestational length, right? Of 9 months. So it all lines up. And we have ourselves a good theological justification for our convenience. Now, we also cannot underestimate how important the theological importance is. This mattered to people. This was their world. Religion, we laugh at it today. A lot of people just go like, ha ha ha, look at that silly tradition. This is what these people had, right? This is what they were building their worlds around. This is what they thought that their universe literally existed because of, right? This was a big, big deal for them. So we have a theological justification for December the 25th. We have a convenient justification for December 25th. Now we can celebrate. Latinist, welcome in. Good to see you. I just noticed that you gave me a follow 55 minutes ago, so that would have been right after I started stream. Thank you so much for the follow, and I apologize that I missed that during my sort of warm-up period. But welcome in, and thanks so much. It's pronounced Iotinist. Iotinist. Okie dokie. I will do my best to remember that. Iotinist. Cool. Anyway, welcome in. Feel free to ask questions, participate, have fun. So, we've got it nailed down on the 25th. Now, there's another thing going on here. Because there's already another thing kind of happening. Because in January, on January the 6th, we're already celebrating Jesus for another reason. Because we've figured out, because we're nailing days down, that he got baptized on the 6th, right? And this is when he got baptized, and the dove from heaven comes down and says, "This is my son with whom I'm well pleased," and Jesus kind of formally begins his ministry, right? So we are celebrating that day already as what we call Epiphany, right? Now, we've got to figure out how to mesh all of this together, because we don't necessarily want too many things going on. The December 25th thing actually works out really, really well in the western half of the Roman Empire. But for a while in the East, the Epiphany is way more important to them. So we need to try to find a way to blend this together if we can. So then we start trying to figure out how we can merge Christmas and Epiphany. Right? We've got to figure out a way to bridge the gap here. Well, how about the fact that we know in the ancient world that the Magi didn't actually show up at the birth? So what if Jesus was born on the 25th and then the Magi showed up on January the 6th? So now we can bring Epiphany in and we can lump it all together. And it just so happens that there's a magic number of days in between there. Those days are 12. Oh, do we like 12? Yeah, because there's 12 apostles. So this could be the 12 days of Christmas. And there we go. There we go. 12 is a strong number. It's divisible by 3 and 4 and 6 and 2. It's a big, strong number. Now, this is a pretty interesting moment here, because this is going to establish a new sort of period of time that we don't really say very much anymore, but historically this is referred to as... Am I typing? Oh yeah, I am typing. This is referred to as Christmastide. Yes, the 12 days of Christmas are supposed to be after Christmas. They're supposed to start on Christmas Day and last until until January the 6th. This is why, this is why the biggest and fanciest gift was given on Epiphany. So if we look at what the singer is singing on 12 Days of Christmas, you get the most stuff on the last day. Because that's when the Magi gave gifts to Jesus. Illuminati confirmed, right? So this is referred to as Christmastide. This is period of the year between when Christmas is and when Epiphany is. Usually what we call, I ain't working on these days. So everybody in the Christian world bought into this idea straight away. Not straight away. It did take a little while for all of this stuff to kind of float around, right? Like the 12 days of Christmas thing wasn't nailed down until like the 500s, like 567 at the Council of Tours. This is when you have the period of holy days that are between gift giving or between birth and gift giving, right? So there you go. Now, so we're getting closer. We're getting closer. Do I think Christmas is more significant post-Council of Nicaea Christians than pre-Council? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know how much of the chat that you've been involved with, but yeah, the celebration of Christmas was not a big popular thing until they started debating this on a what we could call ecumenical level, where we're getting everybody involved in the discussion. And when we can do that, then everybody has to kind of follow the rules, right? If they're doing this in the big churches, if they're doing this in your Alexandrias and your Antiochs and your Jerusalems and your Constantinoples and your Romes, you're going to be doing it everywhere, right? You're going to be following this as much as you can pretty quickly. So that's Christmastide. All the temples unite, correct. Now, so now we have this establishment. And we're going to kind of carry on with this for a little while. Now, what's interesting is that as Christianity becomes more mainstream, the holiday itself becomes more acceptable and more people get involved. And we start seeing some changes. Because when everybody gets involved, everybody's going to want to kind of add their own little thing, right? And we start seeing this used as like a political ploy. And one of the biggest and most interesting things that I can point to here specifically is this guy, Carolus Imperator. You're like, who the heck is Emperor Charles? Charlemagne. I wanted to pick this one specifically because he is going to effectively blackmail the Pope into crowning him emperor of the newly established and minted Holy Roman Empire on Christmas morning. And this is an important thing for Charlemagne because this is going to show him to be the savior of the world. This is why the savior of the world is he's being christened, he's being born, and the Roman Empire is being born again. And this was not lost as an image. And when this happens, you start seeing a lot of other people going, dude, having a coronation on Christmas Day, that's kind of legit because there's a lot of good imagery that I can lean into. Also, what's cooler than getting inaugurated as a king or getting crowned as a king and then having an immediate party where I can just lump my coronation party into an already existing party so I don't have to have two parties. Because it's double dipping. We're going to say, hey, we're celebrating Christmas, but we're also celebrating coronation. So everybody come together and we're just going to feast. And we're going to say, hey, we're so happy that so-and-so is king and that Jesus is born, right? So there you go. Which Christian customs do I think were inspired by Hanukkah customs? Not a lot. And the specific reason why I would say that is because by the time Christianity is establishing itself as the dominant religion in Rome, Judaism had become a religious scapegoat. And the biggest impact... Now, let me be very clear. Christianity literally grows out of Judaism, and Judaism has an immense impact on Christianity itself. However, Hanukkah is not an established religion that gets adopted early on by Christians, mostly because the fact that the passages of Scripture and the Jewish texts that describe the establishment and then canonization of Hanukkah as a religious ceremony are not really widely accepted as Christians in the early church as authentic and scriptural. They're considered apocryphal. So they have valid meaning for teaching, but they don't have the same weight as Scripture because they were written much longer after the scriptural revelatory period. And we could get into biblical canonization discussion, and it gets really, really deep and really, really squirrely. But basically, Hanukkah was not a big Christian practice because after a while they just don't end up looking at Judaism as an example. The Catholic Bible does have the Apocrypha in it, but it didn't early on. That was something that was added in by popes significantly after the discussion of the canonization of the Bible was solidified, which happened in the 360s, 367 specifically. The Easter encyclical of Saint Athanasius of Alexandria is the first place where we get a codified list of 66 books, and it does not include the Apocrypha. And early Christians did not use the Apocrypha as religious. There was some debate about it, but it was not widely considered to be authoritative until after a significant period of time where the Roman Catholic Church wished to established itself as independent from the Eastern Church and then codified the Apocrypha as scriptural and valid as scripture. You could call me a Christian, but a lot of people would not. A lot of people would probably call me a heretic, and I'm kind of okay with that. I was raised in a very conservative Christian household. I think that a lot of the stuff that Jesus said is pretty legit, and I think that a lot of people kind of ignore what he actually said to do. And if you actually live your life according to what he said to do, you're going to end up being a pretty cool person. So you might say that he's a good role model, but I don't necessarily get down with all of the Southern Baptist faith or organized Christian religion today. So, oh no, I would hesitate on any level, academically speaking, to put myself in the same group as Jordan Peterson. I don't know enough about his Christian beliefs to say whether or not I agree with him, but my first response is probably not like Jordan Peterson, but I don't know enough to say. Did heresies have their own celebration dates? That's a great question. Yes and no. In a lot of cases, depending on when the Christological heresy was, they used the same tradition. But no, in that a lot of the earliest and most influential church heresies happened prior to Christians deciding that the 25th was the date of December. Like if we look at like Arianism, one of the biggest and earliest Christological heresies, that was before we see the Christians agreeing when Christmas is. So there wouldn't have been like an Arian Christmas and an Orthodox Christmas, because at that point there just wasn't a Christmas at all. So anyway, so we see Christmas being used as a political angle and a sort of a political mechanism. But then we also decide that we can just kind of use it as a chance to let our hair down in the middle of the winter, right? And by the time we get to the medieval period, Christmastide had basically turned into crazy time. And oh boy, we're talking like crazy amounts of drinking, gambling, debauchery. There was originally, like when we first see carols added, the first carols that we could call Christmas carols weren't stuff like Away in a Manger or Oh Holy Night or Oh Little Town of Bethlehem. The original carols were professional singers or sometimes super drunk people that learned a song and wrote it. And a lot of the old carols that would have been sung during Christmas celebrations were really, really raunchy and saucy and suggestive and more like pub songs than church songs. So you're singing about giving people gifts, and it's not what you're talking about, right? It's like super entendre, right? The whole period of time is just a naughty throwdown, right? Some, especially Central European, so places like France and especially Germany, they add stuff to this, right? You wish they played those songs at Walmart. I do like Carol of the Bells as well. That's probably my favorite Christmas song. And I'm not particularly one that's very fond of Christmas music in general. I definitely don't like most of the stuff that comes on during Christmas time because I worked retail in America way too long. But anyway, one of the interesting things that gets added to this is a Lord of Mischief. And this was a position that would kind of get elected by the people or appointed by the local lord. And the Lord of Mischief basically got to rule during the Christmas celebration from the birth to Epiphany. And this person is in charge of causing trouble. They get to play pranks on people. They get to do petty vandalism. They might get to beat somebody up. They get to organize like pranks. Like, we're going to get these whole people together. We're all going to play a prank on this person that's a jerk. And we're going to use this as a social relief valve where we can kind of get back to this Saturnalia kind of role inversion where if your lord is a giant jerk, you can get him back really, really good, and the Lord of Mischief can pull a giant prank on him that's going to make him look like an idiot, and it's okay because this is kind of what's expected during this time. But what's interesting here is this is going to also grow out of some existing pagan traditions or more traditional stuff. This is also where we're going to start seeing people bring stuff like, well, I don't know, like if you've ever seen The Office, right? And you've seen the Office Christmas episode where Dwight dresses up like Belschnickel. Belschnickel is a legit figure in Northern European custom. And he is basically a personified Lord of Mischief. And if you are impish, he's going to come around and play a trick on you and make you look like an idiot, right? So this idea of getting punished for being bad, perhaps getting a bag of switches, or perhaps getting a lump of coal, right? This is where that stuff comes from. If you're a jerk, you're not going to get anything good. You're going to get tricked and you're going to get punished for it. But, you know, it's fun because why not? We get a little bit of, again, a little bit of that release. Now, it gets bad. It gets really bad. So some people are going to take Christmas to like a huge level, and it becomes 12 days of basically the worst version of spring break. And then stuff starts happening in the religion. Some people are going to decide that they want to go off and protest Christians following the Pope, right? This is, of course, the Protestant Reformation that happens in the 1500s. And one of the things that is going to be particularly big here is when the Puritan faith shows up. So, I'm sorry, I'm not typing here. Here we go. The Puritans. Now, the Puritans are an interesting group. This is a really interesting thing here. So they don't like Christmas at all. In fact, they pretty much hate Christmas. And they hate it because Puritans are typically what we might call anti-fun. Let me catch up with chat here. I don't know if I got everything. The Fairy Tale of New York is the best Christmas song. I don't know if I've ever heard that one. Working retail during the holidays. Yeah, it's gross. I don't think these are SpongeBob letters. These are supposed to be... I can't remember what the specific font is, but it's supposed to look adventure-y. Because the name of the sort of the name of the title here is Adventures in History, right? It's a song about junkies. What's up, DCI Banks? Good to see you. When did Krampus become a thing? Krampus is kind of hard to pin down. We don't really know exactly where he came from. There's a lot of folklore that goes back to especially very old Germanic tradition. But we really start seeing him show up in the 1600s. And he's another kind of an embodiment of this Lord of Mischief idea. Because if you're a bad kid, Krampus is going to take you away in a big sack and eat you, right? So the idea here is like, and Krampus has his own night, which is Krampusnacht, which is before we would celebrate Christmas so that all the bad kids don't get to celebrate Christmas, right? So many of the Christian fringe turned to Islam over time. I don't know. Many of the Christian fringe turned to Islam over the time. We would have to have such a big debate over that. For the moment, I'm going to take it at face value to see what the rest of the statement is, but I have an asterisk. Did they bring the religious celebration dates with them? Islam does not celebrate Christmas, and they don't really have a lot of the same types of traditions. The Muslim faith tends to be a bit more austere, typically has less feasting. Of course, they have very, very strong anti-alcohol prohibitions. So you're not going to see as much about that. Now, you do have holidays, but it's not necessarily a one-to-one comparable kind of thing. Starmate006, welcome in. New viewer. I am a historian. I teach history and sociology and anthropology at college. I've got a lot of fancy pieces of paper that say that I'm good at doing the history thing. I've been streaming here on Twitch for about 4 years now, coming up on 5 in April. No, in May. 5 in May of next year will be 5 years that I've been streaming history here on Twitch. But good to see you. Welcome in. Send to the U.S. on boats. Yeah, we'll talk about that. The Puritans would hate taking a day off from work. What's up, Frank? But maybe they would love harshly pranking a jerk. Maybe so. Yeah. Krampus appears when you turn 40 and you get a Krampus in your tuchus. Ha 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 ha. That's a good one. Tangents are perfectly fine. But I think it's related to the way that Christmas is celebrated here with gifts. Are you familiar with the psychiatrist Jacques Lacan? I've heard his name, but I haven't read any of his stuff. People desire what they lack, and bring it up. Stormy, thank you for the follow. Thank you so much. Welcome to the adventure. He had this desire that people desire what they lack, and you bring this up because during Christmas it seemed that people have these imaginary expectations for gifts that might not fulfill people, although you're not a big fan of him myself. He's a postmodern psychoanalyst who influenced Zizek. Oh, interesting. I do know Zizek quite a bit more than Lacan. Generally speaking, I am not a super big fan of psychoanalytics in the first place. I understand their importance, and I do think that they have a fair amount of good, valid understanding, and that their addition to the larger world of academia is important and influential, but it's not really my world. Most of organized sociology since about 1920 has been trying to give more valid explanations for social tendencies than the psychoanalysts came up with in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And I'm obviously here biased towards like my field, but I can't deny that people like Freud or people like like Lacan or Pavlov or B.F. Skinner. I can't say that those people didn't have an impact on sociology. It's all about passive-aggressive gift giving to make the recipient feel like they didn't give enough. Days since bending continental philosophy 0. Yeah, DCI Banks. I was watching that myself. Anyway, so we have a big church split. We get some Protestants. Some Protestants don't really care very much about Christianity. I'm sorry, not Christianity, Christmas. Some Protestants don't really care very much, right? Like the Lutherans and the Anglicans are going to keep Christmastide, but they're going to tone it down a lot, right? The Presbyterians, though, and the Puritans especially, oh boy, they hate it. They hate the debauchery. They hate the concept of it. And when when this guy takes over England, this is Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell is going to ban it. So in England, during the rule of the Commonwealth, you can't celebrate Christmas. It's banned. You just can't do it. Now, how is that going to impact other places? Well, there are other Protestants that don't really care very much. The Calvinists aren't super big fans of the celebration of Christmas. And when the Puritans get kind of run out of England, they're going to go to America, right? And they're going to bring their hatred of Christmas with them to America, right? So if you live in Plymouth Colony, ain't no celebrating Christmas, right? If you live in Boston, ain't no celebrating Christmas. Now, what's interesting here is that other colonists to the New World do like it, right? So there are Dutch colonists in places like New York City, places like Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey. They're still kind of down with Christmas, and they're the ones that are going to give us an interesting term here. This term Sinterklaas. Now, Sinterklaas is an abbreviation, right? Okay, so Sinterklaas, close enough. But the idea here is this is Saint Nick. It's an abbreviation for Saint Nicholas, and you just don't write the whole thing out. But that is going to give us Saint Nick, and we're getting closer, right? We're getting closer. Cromwell doesn't sound like a lot of fun. He really wasn't. Ban Christmas, Oliver Burgermeister. Oliver Cromwell? I don't know. I don't get the joke, Schwanite, but also good to see you, Schwanite. Was Cromwell a purist himself? He was a Puritan, for sure. You know, his regime was supported by them, but he absolutely was. Yeah, he was a big Puritan. He hated pretty much everything fun. He closed down all of the public theaters, so you couldn't go to theater anymore. He shut down some of the music halls. He let opera stay, which is interesting, and a lot of people make the joke, well, that's because opera is boring as heck. There were some people that were doing theater that managed to keep making a living by doing opera, and they just took all of their plays that they were doing and translated them to opera, but that didn't go over very well. Anyway, the Puritan rule of England was not very fun. It was very strict. It was very focused on like rigidity and solemnity and just not partying. With the Christian fringe, he meant those who were conquered by Islam or joined them willingly. Everyday, sure. There aren't a lot of marginal communities where you see Christianity influencing Islam in the ancient world. In the modern world, there is a lot more celebration of Christmas in Muslim countries than there was in the ancient world, but that's mostly because of the spread of things like global markets and commercialization, not necessarily because of the religious overlap. We still celebrate on the 6th of December. Yeah, there you go. All right. We talked about that back at the beginning of the stream. You'd like to go to a Puritan's house and expose their children to Fortnite and Coca-Cola. Oh, we're getting to Coca-Cola too. Yeah, we're getting to Coca-Cola. So we've got some people over here in America that are just totally anti-Christmas. We've got some people in America that are like, okay, cool, we'll still do Christmas. And then we have this big war where America breaks away from England in the 1770s and 80s, and early 90s. By the time we get to the early 1800s, Christmas really isn't that big of a deal because a lot of people saw Christmas as an English tradition more than they saw it as a Christian tradition. So there's a bit of a disconnect here. Where does it come from and where does it go, right? Well, it starts because of people like this guy. This is a guy named Washington Irving. And Washington Irving is a writer in America. And he starts writing just some little kind of kid stories. But they catch on. And they catch on kind of across the board here. Not just with children, but also with adults. And in his stories, he talks a lot about stuff kind of in a not real way. And this is really interesting here. It's a romanticized version of Christmas traditions. And when Irving is writing about writing about Christmas here, he's writing it from the poor people were able to go get supplies and food and gifts from rich people. And families sat down together and thought about Jesus. And people spent time with their religious members in prayer. And the way that Irving describes Christmas isn't really the way that Christmas had ever been celebrated before. It was just kind of like this romanticized version of this very solemn, respectful thing where you got to have a little bit of fun because he did bring in the gift giving. And specifically here, what's interesting is he includes St. Nicholas. And the way that he depicts St. Nicholas is that instead of having him visit you in a normal way, St. Nicholas rode around on a big flying wagon. And the wagon was, of course, full of stuff, right? You believe the Arab world really needs to have a reformation? The biggest difference that I think between modern Christianity and modern Islam is the Enlightenment period, where the Christian power base made a concerted effort to separate science and politics from religion. Now, it obviously didn't stick in all cases, but there was a concerted effort to separate religion, politics, science, and learning as individual things, right? That's the biggest benefit of the Western Enlightenment, is the idea that we could look at certain things for their independent values, not necessarily all through one particular lens. And the skepticism that came out of the Enlightenment in the Western Christian world is what allowed for things like the separation of church and state to happen in countries. Because there was a recognition of the secular concept by itself. That is happening slow, and that is happening unevenly in Muslim-controlled countries, but there has not been a concerted effort by leading Muslim political and religious figures to have the same thing happen within the Islamic community as a whole. That doesn't mean that's not happening. There are some Muslim countries that are very what we might call forward-thinking, that ensure rights to their citizens, that have equality under the law, that have separation of church and state. You know, countries like Jordan, for example, are examples of more progressive Muslim states that are moving towards a what we might call a more differentiated or institutional separated culture. But this is also not happening in other places like Afghanistan or Iran, where obviously the religion and politics are exactly the same thing. So that's a situation there. It's mostly commercial celebration as retailers and producers make a fortune from those they convince that they're not celebrating properly if they are so bankrupting themselves. Yeah, pretty much. We're getting there, Chris. Within 40 years of Irving writing his stuff about Christmas, there are people writing things about how commercialized Christmas has been. Do I believe the doctrines of Islam lead it to establish more authoritarian attitudes in mainstream Christianity or Judaism? That's an interesting question. If interpreted conservatively and through a fundamentalist lens, yes, because the original Islamic teaching not only does not have a division between stuff like church and state, it unifies church and state. And it was designed to wrap the entire mechanism of social existence into one figure that was the caliph, who of course was Muhammad, because he was the judge and the leader of the religion and the general and the president all wrapped up into one. So it does lend itself towards that ideologically. I don't think it's necessarily guaranteed to end up that way. But if you are going to hold a fundamentalist viewpoint of that religion, it's absolutely going to encourage more centralization of authority into single individuals. He rides around on a big white horse. Oh my good gracious. Called Schlechtwerderwandag. On the rooftops with his servant, Black Pete. Yeah, Black Pete. Has to crawl down the chimneys and deliver gifts. That's why he's black, because of all the soot. Yep. Children here really freak out when they notice their house doesn't have a chimney. How does he get in? Right. Okay, so Irving writes his stories. And in Irving's stories, St. Nicholas comes around with a big wagon full of stuff, right? And he gives you the thing. And we're going to be more respectful now. And we're going to be more solemn now. And we're going to be more focused on the fact that we are grateful to have what we have, right? Santa Claus does not always have the red suit. We're going to get to that in just a second. Here comes this guy. Who is this guy? I would be interested to know how many people know this guy's name. This guy wrote a very famous poem, and it's called A Visit from St. Nicholas. And his poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, is based on the imagery that Washington Irving put forth and has a little bit of individual stuff kind of mixed in. But you probably know Clement Clark Moore for a poem that's not actually titled what everybody think that it's titled. Everybody thinks that it's titled The Night Before Christmas, right? So we've heard 'Twas the Night Before Christmas and All Through the House. This is a poem that Moore wrote. The actual name of it, again, is A Visit from St. Nicholas. And I cannot tell you how impactful that poem is on our modern concept of Christmas. The whole concept of reindeer, the whole concept of him giving gifts and being a big man with a big belly that shakes like jelly and coming at night. This is, again, taking elements that existed from previous customs, Washington Irving's concept most recently, blending it all together and giving us this new version of Christmas. Now, this is what's happening in America, right? There's a movie on Amazon called Christmas Story. It explains all the aspects of Santa. Interesting. Along the way, over in England, there are other people that think, well, maybe we can rejuvenate our version of Christmas as well. And then we get this guy. Who this guy? Well, this guy's pretty famous, and you probably have heard his name before. This guy is Charles Dickens, and he wrote a whole bunch of stories, but one of the most important for our discussion tonight, of course, is A Christmas Carol, and the story of Scrooge and Tiny Tim and being visited by ghosts and being punished for being miserly. This has a huge impact. A huge impact. The concept of buying gifts and having a feast is represented here. The concept of spending time with your family here. This is a big, big, big deal. The concept here that he puts forward of Christmas is going to be one, once again, that is based off of his interpretation of existing concepts that already exist. One that had become fairly popular, that had lasted through the medieval period, was beggars asking for more from the rich during this period of time. And the fact that the rich are going to be portrayed so negatively in A Christmas Carol is direct evidence of that. And this is going to set off a gigantic spurt of gift giving. And that kind of becomes like a thing then, like a whole thing. Not all the aspects that as you're giving into detail, but why the red suit? I'll show you the picture of the red suit in a bit. The reindeer is a bit of a nod to old Germanic evidence of heritage for this period of time. Again, like the Scandinavian stuff where reindeer live. But mostly it was just stylistic. Toy giving goes all the way back to Saturnalia, though. Right, giving a little bit of a gift. Saint Nicholas being a gift giver. Saint Nicholas is the patron saint of toy making. So you're going to see that be pretty common all the way through. The concept of not working through Christmas. Yeah, you got to have the day off for Christmas. And that's actually an interesting thing to point out here. In the early 1800s, Christmas was not a federal holiday anywhere in the United States or anywhere in the world. It wasn't until the 1850s that you start seeing individual states making it a state holiday wrong. A state holiday in their area. It's not until 1870 that the United States has a federal holiday called Christmas. And we think that it's, this whole thing. But, it's not always been there. At this point, it's 150-ish years old. You gotta lay out carrots and sugar cubes for the horse. Interesting. The movie you mentioned talks about those things. Okay, cool. Saturnalia, it is related to Saturn. Yeah. So that was a Roman practice that was around the time of harvest that celebrated harvest and gave thanks to Saturn for a good harvest. Another person that had a massive impact on how we celebrate Christmas is this lady. This is the previous to Elizabeth II, longest reigning monarch of England. This is Queen Victoria. Now, Victoria's family had a Germanic heritage, and her sister and herself really start bringing in a lot of the Germanic elements to celebrate Christmas for themselves. And one of the things they really start leaning into from the Germanic heritage are lights and trees. Because again, if we go back to the early traditional Germanic concepts of trees being synonymous with living through the winter, we're going to start bringing in Christmas trees. And we're going to start doing stuff like putting candles and lights on our Christmas trees to remind ourselves of the fact that the year is going to get longer soon. And we are preserving the light through the darkness. Now, this is, of course, the old pagan version of things. But when Victoria decides that this is what she's going to do, everybody then also does it, because let's not forget how much of an impact she has, not just on England for living so long, but the fact that she's related to basically everybody else, right? This is going to be a tradition where you're going to have the future Tsar of Russia, the future Kaiser of Germany, and the future King of England all hanging out at the palace with their grandmother looking at a Christmas tree. And there's a reason we call this the Victorian era, because this is something that becomes copied as the height of style. And this is really where Christmas trees start becoming a standardized part of the celebration of Christmas, because she's going to be really emphasizing kind of bringing this stuff back from her German heritage. So at this point, man, we've got trees and lights, and we've got caroling coming back, but we're actually writing Christmas carols now that are nicer. We've got Jesus, we've got gift giving, we've got St. Nicholas or Father Christmas, but we don't really have Santa Claus yet. So where do we get Santa Claus? During first Christmas period in the First World War, the British soldiers were alarmed to see that German trenches were covered in pine trees. Yep. They thought it was some kind of trick. They went in full battle readiness, and then the singing of Christmas carols were after. Yeah, so there's the famous Christmas truce during World War I. And that wasn't something that the English were super down with, and they didn't really have a lot of experience with that. But they knew what it was because they recognized this from Victoria. It hadn't necessarily permeated the entire population of the world yet, but it's starting to knock down dominoes, right? This is before we have the internet, so it takes a little while for stuff to move. So where do we get Santa Claus? Well, from a position and a person that you've probably never heard of before. From this guy. You're like, hey, who's that guy? That guy's name is Haddon Sundblom. And he was, in the early 1900s, a professional illustrator. And ads for corporations at that time were done by hand and then reproduced massively. Oh yeah. The hair here is perfectly coiffed, right? So Sundblom gets an interesting task. The Coca-Cola company approaches him in 1931 and they say, hey, look, we want to run some ads that advertise Coca-Cola, and we want this to be something to run during Christmas time because people don't drink very much soda during Christmas. And you're like, well, why not? Because it's cold outside, right? Coke had made its entire thing, oh, look how refreshing this is. Look how amazing this is, because you know, when you're hot and you're sweaty and it's a hard day, man, you want to go grab a Coca-Cola. But if it's snowing and the wind is blowing and you're not going to go outside, man, you're not going to go buy a Coke. It's cold outside, right? So they want to try to push this as something that they link irrevocably with Christmas. And this is what we get. And if you ever wondered why Santa is wearing red and white, it's because it's Coca-Cola colors. And this is the ad that Sundblom made in 1931 that told you to drink Coca-Cola. Because St. Nicholas brings this, and this is Santa Claus. This is, when you think Santa Claus, this is it. And the reason you think this is because of Coca-Cola. Yep. Maybe it's because your mom drank Coca-Cola when she was pregnant with me, but you could go for a Coca-Cola all year long. I mean, I'm a fan, but I prefer Dr. Pepper. I'm weird like that. He was a very talented painter, and he did a whole series of these, by the way. This ad caught on so well. He did versions of Santa Claus in Coca-Cola colors for like the next 7 or 8 years in a row. And this reinforces the idea that this is what Santa Claus looks like. And just to be for real, this is going to take the image that we get from the Visit from St. Nicholas poem. It's a guy that's a big beard. He's got a big belly. He's got rosy cheeks. But we're going to wrap this quite literally in Coca-Cola colors, and boom, we've got Santa Claus. That's the way that we get it. That's literally where it comes from. Hetacato. Of course, the Santa Claus is because of corporate greed. Yeah, well, you know. Does America have the habit of drinking Bischofsweizen or Glühwein during Christmas? So over here we call it mulled wine or spiced wine, and it is still around, but it's not really common. It's not necessarily associated with Christmas very much in America overall. Now, if you go to certain places in America, like the northern part of the Midwest, so places like Wisconsin or Minnesota or Michigan, you're going to see a lot more of that stuff because the population of people that moved into those areas is going to be much more Dutch, much more Northern German, and much more Scandinavian. So those traditions are held by people in the United States if you go to areas that have traditional historic relations to those regions in Europe. But as like an overall concept, not really. Eggnog is much more popular as a Christmas drink, but even that is not necessarily super duper popular. Hot chocolate is like the go-to drink for most cold weather times in America. That is a big old tradition in America is hot chocolate. You have an uncle that looks. I have an uncle that looks like that so much that kids reverted to their beliefs. It turns out Santa is real. Is real, yeah. It made Jolly Old Men more popular too, for sure, right? Another tangential thing. What do I think about people like Gilles Deleuze and Michel Foucault who study media like this with Santa selling Coca-Cola as part of the hyper... Foucault is interesting insofar as he thinks that he's interesting. I'm not a big fan at all. Not a big fan at all. And I'm kind of wondering if you are a return person that we've banned several times. Just to be very clear about that. Glühwein is gaining traction in Quebec. You just bought a sweet bottle and a spice kit for it. Muffin is a big fan. Interesting. Interesting. You had a wee glass earlier. You've never had eggnog. I've never had what we could call proper eggnog. Proper eggnog has alcohol in it. I have had non-alcoholic eggnog. Not pilk. No. Bad junk collector. You're gonna make you go get some hot cocoa now? Yeah, I've got some hot chocolate in the cabinet, and I'm like thinking about it right now. Foucault is a prison. Ideologically, yes. But anyway, so we add Santa Claus to our concept of buying presents, to our concept of a more reserved, less boisterous Christmas, to our concept of bringing in trees and putting lights on them and singing carols, and here we have Christmas, right? This is where Christmas came from. So this has been, thus far, the story and the history of Christmas. And I really think that this is a fascinating concept because a lot of what people think about when they think about Christmas they go, it's just always been that way. It's just always been perpetually this way. And it hasn't, right? It just hasn't. Our version of Santa Claus that we think of today when we think of Santa Claus isn't even 100 years old yet. So, there you go. There's Christmas for you. So if anybody has any questions about any of this stuff, I'd be happy to answer. But otherwise, that's kind of catching us up to today. And everybody now knows the real story of Christmas if you were hanging around. A tale I tell sometimes, your second ex had no real understanding of Christianity and Christmas. Our first Christmas together, she woke me up holding a birthday cake, singing happy birthday to the Christmas father. It was surreal. Interesting. Interesting. There's a very popular song that came out. I don't know exactly when it was written, but I first heard it in the 90s, and it has become a favored song that you get a very young girl to sing in church, and the song is called Happy Birthday, Jesus. And it's a very sweet song, and if you get a little girl to sing it, it's even sweeter sounding. But yeah, it's not actually Jesus' birthday. Jesus was like pretty much not like the overlap with Christmas was not the original thing. Weird Al's Christmas at Ground Zero. Oh no, I do like Weird Al's Christmas at Ground Zero. I do think that my favorite of his songs, though, if we're talking about Christmas songs, is The Night Santa Went Crazy, which is a song off of his album Bad Hair Day. That is my favorite of Weird Al's Christmas songs, and one that I could listen to many, many times. McHev, you're very, very welcome. If there are any questions you have, you're welcome to ask. We usually just kind of hang around for a little while and make sure that we've cleared everything up, and then we'll go head out on a raid in just a little bit. Driving home for Christmas, that's a good one. That's a good one. A bit more involved, perhaps, than some other ones. Good clip there. That expression about pilk. For those of you that don't know, pilk is something that Pepsi actually tried to market, where you mix Pepsi with milk. And this is something that they actually recently tried to get people to drink. Yeah. No. No. Matt wants to see poppies. Okay, we can do some poppies. Here we go. For those of you that have been around, you know these things, but remember that you have points that you can redeem for things. And here's poppies just for Matt. We'll do a little bit of a Christmas time poppies. How about that? It's Christmas time. Hey everybody. I hope that during this time of the year, you can take some time away and just relax. And maybe the thing that I'm pointing at is the Christmas star. I don't know. Maybe the thing that you're missing right now is a stroll through a field of poppies. I don't know what you need. Maybe it's just a hug. Would you like a hug? I'll send one to you, courtesy of flying reindeer. And I hope that you have a good one this Christmas time. Thanks very much. um, so that's Poppies. And Matt wants to see the puppy. All right, let me call the puppy, who I think has been in the room a couple of times, but I haven't actually gotten her on stage. Let me call the puppy. I think I hear her. Okay, here comes the puppy. All right, let's switch over to puppy cam, and we'll get some puppy. Hello, Kaylee. What you doing? For those of you that might be new to the chat, this is Kaylee. She is the stream mascot, and just a puppy, just a good girl. She has a Christmas gift of herself that she doesn't know about yet, but we always get her a toy, usually a cheap one that's like just a couple of dollars, and we get it specifically so that she can demolish it, because she loves like ripping toys to pieces. Oh yes. Oh, the Kaylee poo. Are you done? Is that all? Tad, if you're here, I have begun adding stickers to the desk. I was going to try to fit a bat one right there, but it didn't fit. But thank you for the stickers, Tad. Top 3 Christmas movies. Oh, that's a tough one. Home Alone. Probably my favorite Christmas movie. I don't know. Like, I don't really like Christmas movies. It's not really my thing. Um, that expression has real context now. Pepsi with creamer is good, so it's not that far from milk. I've never tried either. Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. That one's so horrible. It's got Pia Zadora in it as a child. Like a very, very young. She's like 6 or 7. I can't remember. There's a guy in a bear suit. It's bad. We'll put that one up there in the list just because it's fun. We'll say Die Hard, right? Just to spite everybody. So easy this there. Home Alone, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, and Die Hard. We need a picture of Shane staring at a ladybug on the end of his nose. Maybe. I do research as well. The polar bear was hilarious. Yes. So I just actually so I'm weird. I don't have a particular topic that I like to specialize in. I like to read everything. So I read a lot of papers, like just like published historical papers, and I try to keep up with all of the news. I just got through reading a book this morning on Arthurian legend, but specifically how people during the Stuart line of kings looked at Arthurian legend, because like King James the First was hailed as author as a reborn Arthur, and then Charles II was Arthur, and then William of William and Mary was Arthur. So that was a really interesting book. The author of the book rambled quite a bit, but overall it was a fairly interesting book, and I was happy to learn from it. Before that, I read a book on the history of socialist economic thought. Before that, I read a book on restoration drama. The next book on the stack is one on medieval English poetry that isn't Chaucer. So, like the non Chaucerian English poets during the medieval period. I read just about anything I can put my hands on. I read an anthropology book earlier this year about cultural anthropology. Um, I study a lot of stuff. You're currently looking to household personnel in the Plantin Moritas printing company during the 17th century. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of like little niche things that people could get into that are really fascinating. My personal approach is I want to learn everything, but to learn everything, you have to you have to be willing to read anything. And a lot of historians want to pick like one thing and then focus on that and then never do anything else. And that doesn't really get me a lot of love when it comes to me talking with my other historian friends, who are of course all specialized and all want to do like one thing forever, and I just can't stand that. Everything overlaps with everything else, and it's just way too much for me to just pick one thing, right? I mean, I love doing deep dive stuff, and I've got 2 master's degrees, and I've obviously done a lot of research on a formal level and published stuff on a formal level, but like, I just want to read everything. French botanist called Tournefort. Never heard of that guy. Like late 1700s, early 1800s French botany, like right out of the Enlightenment French botany. There's a lot of stuff that was pretty influential. A lot of that stuff ended up influencing Darwin, who was actually quite a big fan of botany, not just drawing birds. I don't know if Darwin ever read Tournefort, but it wouldn't have surprised me if he did. All right. Yeah, I don't want to just do one thing though. It sounded boring, but she realized he was one of the people that ended the Renaissance way of thinking about knowledge. Yeah. See, that's the kind of thing that happens. Like you every now and then you'll find people. So late 1600s, early 1700s. Okay, yeah, so still Enlightenment, but early Enlightenment instead of late Enlightenment. Um, I mean, there are people like that. I mean, and what's crazy about this is like he probably is remembered as a botanist, but then there's probably like he also probably did 10 other things, right? Because a lot of those people weren't just like one thing. Like we call Newton a physicist, right? He's a Newtonian physics guy, but he also did stuff with light, and he did stuff with astronomy, and he did stuff with natural science, like biological science and mathematics, and like he did everything. He wasn't just one guy that did one thing with like laws of thermodynamics or laws of motion. So we tend to pigeonhole a lot of those people with like their he's an ancient writings expert. Yeah, see, that's the kind of stuff like these people all had like a wide variety of skills, and I think that's something that I respect more. I'm a big fan of the old Greek scientia concept, where if you're going to study the world, you study the world, and it's the world, not just like one thing. Right, so like I lean on a lot of my friends that are from other areas. Like my wife is has a PhD in molecular biology, and I've had her teach me a whole lot of stuff about genetics, and that has really influenced the way that I understand history, especially like early human history, because we can now learn so much about early human history from stuff like genetics. You know, I know about computer technology, and I've studied philosophy and economics and creative writing and language. It's all related. It's all related. Yep. Um, so that's the plan. All right. Let's go do ourselves a raid. Who are we going to raid? Sent me a whisper. I don't think it does, but I'll give it an eyeball. Who are we gonna raid? Let's see. Who did we raid last time? I think last time I was on, we raided nobody. I think we just shut everything off. I think the time before that we raided Cave Geek. I think the time before that we raided Allie because Allie was streaming and she never streamed, and I was like, oh, let's go raid Allie. I think the time before that we raided Homozygote. And the time before that we raided Professor Ashley. Let's go raid Damage. We haven't raided Damage in a while. Damage is an artist, mostly does anthropomorphic animals, but dude's like legit history guy. And will do a lot of stuff with especially arms and armor that are historically accurate. And I've helped him do some historical research for stuff that he's writing. So, you know, pretty good guy. So we're going to go see Damage. You're very welcome, Fall Machine. I saw you pop in earlier and I didn't say hey. That's on me. I apologize for that. But yeah, so let's say hey to Damage. I would love to say that I'm going to be able to stream this weekend, but I don't know. I've got stuff going on Saturday and Sunday, so we'll see. I do want to get some Gundam building in. I haven't done that in a while. I mean, I haven't streamed in a while. This is like the first time I've streamed in like 10 days, but I was quite sick. But anyway, let me say thanks to everybody. Thank you to everybody for hanging out in chat. Thanks everybody for the new follows. And also need to make sure that I thank everybody supporting me outside of the stream. You can see patrons and people that have donated books. And let's go say hey to Damage. So yell adventure and throw some hats if you got them. But until then, take it easy, everybody.